Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, if you're in India. Good morning, good evening, if you're in some other part of the world watching today's session. This session is around geospatial data. We're going to talk about governance, policy, technology, and a whole lot around the geospatial ecosystem. My name is Ravi Chandar. I'm the moderator for the session. And as you will see as the session progresses, the person least qualified to be talking about geospatial data and the like. We have an extremely interesting set of speakers and panelists, and I will come to them as it's their turn to speak. Now, during the course of this session, you have a chance to ask your questions or make your comments in the chat box on your Keystone platform. And later on in the discussion, we panelists will have a chance to address those questions. We will start today's session with our keynote speaker. And before I go to him, I just want to give you a sense of what we are going to try and achieve over the next 2 hours. In the area of geospatial data, governance, policy, and the rest, we are going to try and get a sense of where we are currently in the geospatial space. How did we get here? What's been our journey to get where we are today? Then we will talk in terms of where do we wish to get to in geospatial ecosystem, and what are the possible pathways to get to that desired end stage. So essentially 3 aspects to it. Where are we right now? Where do we wish to go? And how do we get there? It's going to have, while there will be talk about challenges and the like, the focus is going to be in terms of a solutioning focus, in terms of how do we overcome any challenges and get to what we want. Our first keynote speaker is Dr. Vijay Raghavan, who is the Principal Scientific Advisor for the Government of India. Dr. Vijay Raghavan is a Padma Shri and a distinguished professor in the field of developmental genetics and the former director of NCBS Bangalore. He's part of the US National Academy of Sciences, fellow of Royal Society, and a whole lot more. The thing I found most interesting in his bio is he has a new species of gecko, which was named after him. And if I've got the pronunciation right, it is called Hemidactylus Vijay Raghavani. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Dr. Vijay Raghavan. Over to you, Dr. Vijay Raghavan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravi Chandar. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here. This is a very important area which you have under discussion, and the panelists are very qualified. And I'm sure this will be a very interesting panel discussion, and I look forward to listening to that. My brief intervention will add one point and focus on that point to the points you added. Dr. Ravi Chandar said, he wanted to know where we are, where we want to go, and how do we go to where we want to go. I would add one more point to that as the focus of my intervention, and that's about how did we come here. And how did we come here is important because if you look at, what topics we want to include in the panel discussion, they are the mapping industry, the current challenges and roadblocks, the data gaps, the role of institutions and organizations in special data policy, implications of new policy guidelines, and the expectations of the geo community. All of these are very, very important, and they will unlock the system going forward. But together with this, we need to understand what are the high-level problems we need to solve today, in addition to the more immediate economic and social issues with improved mapping can address. And those high-level problems can be summarized in 3 words: climate, energy, and environment. If these 3 issues are not addressed, then all our economic and other aspects are for naught. So to address these 3 issues, we need to know how we came here. And there are 2 important points in understanding where we came here in the context of these 3 words: climate, energy, and environment. First of all, how did we as a species come to dominate the earth, right? So that point I'll summarize very briefly. Then point out how we as a species have changed the earth in a manner where we are now responsible for its future. And the third point, how information, knowledge, and decision making synthesized from knowledge is going to be critically important going forward. So the first point, how did we as a species come about? That is extraordinary. And that extraordinary low probability event is clearly stated in the theory of evolution by natural selection, which Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace clearly propounded. And basically, this allows the selection of those who are fit in a certain environment. But in this process, we're all linked by a common thread of life. All life on Earth is linked. It has a common origin and there's a common thread. And that common thread is, metaphorically DNA. And therefore, the metabolic processes in the lowliest of single cellular organisms and the largest of dinosaurs or whales is has very many common features. So that commonality is important. But during this evolution of this range of animals in between, something rather remarkable happened. And those three things with respect to humans not only transformed us and made us special, but made us have the opportunity to transform the planet. And those three things are simply stated. We had the ability, unlike our other primate cousins, to oppose thumb and forefinger. This allows you as a teacher to throw a chalk at a student who's sleeping, but also make tools, make instruments of various kinds, and shape the planet around us. So this ability to grasp objects and use them in a variety of ways is may not be unique, but being unique. The second dramatic evolutionary change was our ability to voice sounds in a manner where language could evolve. That range of frequency, of amplitude, modulation, the changes in our voice box and the corresponding changes in our brain were extraordinary. This was a very important component, this and the previous one, in our ability to change the planet. But a third dramatic change happened, and that came about, but was selected for in a manner distinct from what happened in our other non-human primate, in our cousins, chimpanzees, gorillas, and so on. In those animals, the size of the brain is proportionate to their body in a certain ratio. In us, our brain, and particularly some parts of our brain, is disproportionately large, right? This disproportionately large brain requires huge amounts of energy. Even for the size of the brain our non-human primate cousins have, they must eat pretty much constant. But we don't need to eat constantly, and we have a much larger brain. How is that? We seem to have learned the ability to pack high calorific content into meals by being able to cook food in a manner which other animals can't. So these three dramatic changes, maybe cooking is not the only reason for a large brain, but could be a factor. These three have made us different. But these three have made us different so much that we have tools, we have language, and we have, because of our brain, unusually an extraordinary power of abstraction, consciousness, which perhaps no other animal has. And we have become, from being merely products of evolution on this canvas of this planet, and as other philosophers have pointed out, we now wield the paintbrush which determines the future of this canvas of this planet. So we are now the stewards of this planet. So this is how we came about. So there's an extraordinary, responsibility. Now that responsibility has been used in manners which are, again, quite, unimaginable, even to humans more than 10,000 years ago. About 10,000 years ago, we started domesticating plants and animals. And as this progressed, there was clearly a limitation on the expansion of human civilization and human population because land was running out of its capacity to feed human population. Humans then invented ways by which, through manure and by fertilizer, which was then guano and later on from nitrate mines, could re-energize the soil and allow agriculture products, animal feed, everything to come up. Even so, there were limitations. In the early 20th century, two scientists, Haber and Bosch, invented the Haber-Bosch process to grasp ammonia from the hydrogen from the atmosphere, nitrogen from the atmosphere, and make ammonia. And this ability to take nitrogen and make ammonia, and from then make ammonical fertilizers, allowed an unlimited expansion of agriculture. It also sadly allowed the creation of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons. Well, that's another story. But the availability of fertilizer meant that agriculture no longer had limitations and populations grew enormously. Then we had the industrial revolutions, the first, second, third, and fourth industrial revolutions. And if there's one common theme which runs across these revolutions, it's a simple one. It's the self-confidence of humans, of elites and those in power in particular, but of humans in general, to feel that their role is to rule over nature, right? There are many civilizational themes which talk about living with nature and interacting with that and so on. These themes in Indian cultures and civilization, in South American ones, and so on. There are many such. But those were not the themes of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution's themes were, if there's a problem, we can fix it. If we're running out of copper, we'll find a way. If communication has to be done in some other manner, we'll find a way. If cities, need to be packed with more people, we'll find a way. If we need more water, we'll fix it. If we need more energy, we can fix it. This confidence came about because of the successes of science and technology applied through economics and politics and governance and so on all over the world. But there's also a fundamental law of physics which such an approach tends to forget. And that law is a simple one. If you want order and prosperity and wealth in a particular location, i.e., you want to reduce entropy as it were, reduce chaos, then this comes at a cost. And that cost must be at a cost of natural resources, as at a cost of energy, at a cost of exploitative markets, of exploiting other people, and so on. In other words, if you want your house to be rich and well organized and clean, it came at a cost of other people's houses not being so. Now, today's world has come into a different context altogether. People all over the world have been empowered, and no one wants to be at the receiving edge of giving work to others for which they will be more ordered and you will be in trouble. More fundamentally, the consequences of climate change, environmental devastation, and a lack of sustainable living for many has created a groundswell of a view that sustainable development for all is a goal. And that requires that development take place without exploiting the environment and without exploiting other people or your own people. And this poses an enormous challenge in multiple socio-cultural ways, but also in the way of thermodynamics. How do you have order without consequent disorder elsewhere, all over the planet? Now, fortunately, there are some solutions or near solutions to this. Availability of renewable energy of various kinds, and the availability of communication technologies, and the availability of ways by which power can be used, better transmission chains of various kinds, means that we can be much more energy efficient and environmental friendly in whatever we do. So that's the plan. Now, what is all this, I'll end by saying, what is all this got to do with data, right? Where does data come? The fact of the matter is that we have a planet now of several billion humans. Today, humans and our livestock constitute 98% of vertebrate biomass, right? 10,000 years ago, humans and our livestock and our pets constituted less than 1% of vertebrate biomass. So we dominate the planet. So we are generating data of all kinds, both what we're seeing, climate, weather, transportation, health, agriculture, floods, the way rivers flow, where glaciers melt and everything. But we're making a very serious mistake. We can use all this data relatively easily in immediate commercial activities. There's no doubt about it. But we must remember that data needs to have two major sets of components. The first one, those who have data have power, and that power results in an asymmetric world. And therefore, access to data and its fruits must be democratized. Otherwise, you will have a great asymmetry. Historically, knowledge has been power, and the current tendency that data is essential for knowledge means that there will be a great asymmetry in the exercising of power which comes to data, and that must change by us having access to data and its consequences on a more democratic way. So that's teaching and training in the use of data in one's own language and having applications which allow us to do that, empower us to be owners of data rather than those to whom data and its consequences are pervaded. Yeah. The second aspect is about data itself. No matter who owns it, you must remember that information needs to be annotated. Data needs to be taken up in a manner where it's annotated. Information needs to go to knowledge. Knowledge needs to go to understanding. And the understanding has to go into reasoning, into multiple parameters and decision making. Now, this cannot be done by apps alone. This cannot be done by APIs and putting layers and giving that information. Ultimately, we need to have mechanisms where the ability to understand, grasp complexities of data across multiple domains and take a decision needs to be done. Humans have done this over a historical period with ease. You go in with a Bayesian prior. Humans have a viewpoint, and they say this is the way the world is. And they're prepared to change their views depending on what consequences that view has, right? And that's a relatively slow process. Today, the vagaries, the challenges of climate change, energy, and the environment require us to take decisions very rapidly, not on a time scale which we are used to doing. And that requires an ability to integrate the analysis of data and understanding and its use at multiple levels. This is a huge challenge. I'd like to end by saying that in governments, in politics, we need to take decisions by the weekend or in 2 weeks. That's the time scale we're talking about taking decisions, right? It's very easy for those who are outside to say, why did you do this and why didn't you do that? But those in government have to take a decision fast, and the availability of data is critically important. And having taken that data and that decision, you cannot change your view the next week. You have to find ways of dealing with the consequences of every decision. This is about governance and politics. Industry wants to see profits in each quarter, right? It doesn't want to say, I'll do this and I'll see profits 5 years, 10 years later, right? Industry wants to see profits in a quarter. And scientists and technologies want to give solutions in a decadic time. So there are huge asymmetries in core capabilities and desires of these three sections. So data must have also the ability to cross-connect these three speeds over these three different sectors and result in a way by which material and ideas can flow between these three different speeds of movement and allow decision making to be taken really well in all three. And benefits coming from science and technology come at a very rapid pace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay Raghavan, for that. I mean, been very, very enlightening. You know, I was just reminded as I heard your earlier bit about the species. For those of you, I think, who haven't read this book, there's a book, Indica, by Pranay Lal, which gives a sense of the natural history of the Indian subcontinent. It does delve into some of the things that Dr. Vijay Raghavan alluded to. For me, there were 2-3 takeaways, and then when we come to the panel discussion, I would like to ask a few more related to geospatial policy per se, which we haven't discussed. But for me, the takeaway really was that we are the stewards and custodians, and the elite have a responsibility in terms of what they do with all the large data and the information. I think that was an extremely important point as we go forward in the panel discussion. And you mentioned about information, knowledge, understanding. I think of it in terms of the 4 I's. So you get information, you derive insights from the information, then you generate ideas from this information and insights, and you take it to implementation. And as Dr. Vijay Raghavan aptly pointed out, in the current age, speed of action is extremely important. And while industry wants it at super speed because there are profits and other issues involved, academia and scientists may move at a more slowing glacier. Of course, the glaciers are no longer slowly dissolving, it's dissolving much faster, but they're willing to wait a little longer. So how do we marry in terms of government, industry, academia? And we'll have issues to discuss this. I next call upon the 2 WRI veterans, Beena Shetty and Raj Bhagat. They will give us a sense about the subject that we are talking about today. And I think Beena and Raj will also walk us through certain case studies and applications where they have had occasion to use the geospatial data. Over to you, Beena.
Thank you so much, Ravi. And thank you, Dr. Raghavan, for the insightful keynote address. Very eloquently laid out the context for this session. As you mentioned, with our recent technological advances, capturing spatial information, has now become possible, and ensuring that this data is made available to a wider platform is definitely a step in the right direction. And our hope is that this, progressive move triggers innovations in the space, makes governance and policy making, especially in the sectors that you highlighted, climate, energy, and environment, much more data driven. So with that, let me share my screen. All right. So as you can see, we have a very impressive panel lined up here today, and I really can't wait to get the conversation started. Huge thank you for all of you for taking the time out for being here. I'm also thrilled to have Ravi Chandar moderating this session. I think with all of the experience that you bring to the table, I'm sure we'll have a very engaging conversation. So before we jump into this discussion, I'd like to take a bit of time and showcase some of our work in WRI-India. If you've attended some of our sessions this week, there have been many conversations around how data plays a key role in the urban development space. You've heard multiple occasions, our data community often complain about lack of good, clean data. But what do we really do with this data? A lot of times I've seen a huge gap in understanding how data fits into this space. So my intent, with this presentation is really to showcase how research organizations such as ours rely on multiple diverse geospatial data sets for our strategic planning projects. So we have access to technology to create advanced models. We have the skills, we have the expertise, and oftentimes it's access to data that ends up being our biggest challenge. And a little bit about ourselves. We are part of the Sustainable Cities program. We focus on key deep dive cities in India, working with local government agencies and city agencies. And we tackle key urbanization challenges such as congestion, pollution, climate change. And with the help of map and visuals, our real aim is to initiate local discourse and policy dialogue. And as I've said before, we rely on a variety of data sets. So we leverage census data for vulnerability assessments, weather data from IMD for statistical modeling, DEMs or digital elevation data to build flood risk models. So I'll be showcasing some of this work where we've used, all of these data sets in the next section. In our toolkit, we extensively use Google Earth Engine and Python for classifying satellite imagery to track temporal changes in our built up and green cover. And we're currently working with multiple stakeholders on national, state, and city-led projects across India. So in Delhi, we're partnering with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs on projects related to the economic geography of the region. In Telangana, we're partnering with TSIC, the Innovation Cell, to explore the impacts of a regional pharma economy. Bangalore, we're working with BMRCL to support on integrated transport planning. Mumbai, we're providing technical support to MCGM in drafting the city's climate action plan, by conducting vulnerability assessments, building flood risk models, and estimating GHG inventories for the city. And, apart from all of this, there are also multiple research projects currently underway across, cities pan-India. So, the big question that we try to solve every day, how do we make our cities more resilient, inclusive, and competitive with the help of data? Now, according to UN projections, by 2050, 7 out of 10 people in the world will live in urban spaces. And for India, this translates to almost 80 crore people living in, our urban cities. That's nearly double of where we are right now. So if you think about, the city that you live in, what changes, would your city need to make in the next 30 years to accommodate and adapt to this growing pressures on our resources and services? So to ensure sustainable and equitable growth with data, what we try to do is understand the needs of these growing cities, and we evaluate opportunities for improved resource usage. So under the Amrit scheme, we're currently working on area development strategies. So we're looking at local area plans. We were redesigning city cores. We're looking at town planning schemes. We were looking at expansions along the peripheries. And here what we're really doing is incorporating multiple GIS layers, including built form, land ownership, and we evaluate the feasibility of these projects to balance the social, economic, and environmental considerations at a local level. With the recent pandemic, there's been a huge push and drive to promote and incentivize our domestic pharmaceutical ecosystem. So as part of a feasibility analysis of a pharma cluster in Telangana, we've spatialized the economic activity and infrastructure to assess the competitiveness of the proposed cluster. So, here we're looking at the spatial distribution of the pharma industry. We're looking at locations of testing labs, cold chains, research institutes, and we're assessing the proximity to essential infrastructure. So in terms of logistics, do we have access to ports, major highways? Are there gaps in our transport freight corridors? And all of the essential infrastructure that's relevant to the pharma biomedical industry. NCR, we're looking at the economic geography and spatial spread of industries from the city center and along metro corridors. And a lot of time and effort was spent here in spatializing the available economic census data. So, the intent here is to understand the evolution of industry clusters, identify key economic drivers, and project future growth. This allows us to really assess, where we are right now and where we need to be to get closer to the government's ambitious $5 trillion GDP target. Bangalore, we're looking at transit-oriented development projects. This is a proven planning strategy, which concentrates jobs, services, housing around public transport. And, this makes cities more productive while reducing our carbon footprint. So here, what we're doing is evaluating the current land use, assessing the consumed FARs, and the potential impact and opportunities of enhancing these FARs to facilitate improved utilization of spaces around our public transport. Resource optimization is also a critical piece, where we evaluate our current service gaps in our networks. So these are service accessibility maps that we create, which are a great way to highlight existing connectivity gaps and lack of services to vulnerable sections of the society, specifically those sections that rely on these modes of transport. In some of our past sessions, this week, there was talk of building these 15-minute neighborhoods within our city spaces. So it's an urban residential concept where most of our citizens can meet their needs by a short walk or a cycle ride. And essentially, the idea here is to ensure equitable access to those who do not own cars and reduce the reliance on transport. So here we're looking at gaps in our networks, that don't meet service level benchmarks that are defined for access to amenities such as schools, open spaces, hospitals. Are these public spaces easily and safely accessible by our vulnerable populations, the children, youth? Can we bring in the gender lens into our planning here? Do we have sufficient access to toilets? Can we have more lit streets to make these mini cities more vibrant and safer? We're also looking at capacity assessments, so can we optimize the location of our healthcare facilities to ensure adequate number of beds per capita across all of our wards? All of these things become crucial in improving the quality of life in our cities. Here we're looking at overlaps in services between our bus networks and metro corridors in Bangalore. And we're crunching large gigabytes of data sets here. So we're looking at, GPS locations of buses for every 10 seconds. And we're also looking at ticketing information from our metro services. So here, what we're doing is evaluating the potential of our mode shifts, gaps in our last mile connectivities to reduce the burden of congestion, specifically on our roads in Bangalore. This is a mobility benchmarking study. And really, with the help of these indicators, we're trying to assess how connected and accessible our cities are. Mobility, the questions we try to ask here: how well does a city move and how safe is it? So we work on road safety projects such as these, where we use crash data from FIRs, which we get from our police databases. We geolocate these accidents, identify black spots, and that we now know that most of our fatalities are at intersections. Can we correlate this with road design? Is it a poor turning radius? Was it a high speed limit? Can we identify strategies to fix all of these issues? This is an interesting application of machine learning, where we hope to quantify crowds. Now, currently, there's no means of, quantifying footfall in public spaces. We have no means of estimating exact counts of footfall in a given city, and there have been past instances of foot over bridges collapsing, stampedes due to overcrowding. And I'd like to point out that, this is from February 2021 during COVID time. So you can imagine how much more crowded these spaces tend to get. So using camera feeds, what we're doing here is developing AI models to help extract metrics such as footfall density, crowd speeds, and we're looking at the spatial and temporal trends to assess conflict points and stress zones during peak hours. And along with this, we're also building models that can do this for pedestrian and vehicle detection for some of our road safety and design projects. In this emerging EV space, we're identifying ideal locations for setting up electric charging infrastructure by identifying demand clusters. So here again, we're bringing together multiple data sets, population projections, vehicle ownership, traffic flows, presence of petrol stations, parking lots, to assess the feasibility of these charging stations. Finally, environment and climate change, it's been in the news lately. The very alarming IPCC report has shown that GHG emissions from human activities have been responsible for approximately 1 degree of warming over the last 100 years. And over the next 20 years, our temperatures are expected to most likely exceed 1.5 degrees. And we know that the effects of climate change are experienced unevenly in cities, with the urban poor facing the brunt of it as they lack sufficient infrastructure to respond to these risks. So we're currently using a WRI framework called UCRA, which is the Urban Community Resilience Assessment, to measure these differentiated city risks across our. So we looked at the impacts of heat on low-income settlements, and what we found was a 5-degree difference in temperatures between neighboring settlements. And this was essentially caused due to lack of green cover, choice of roofing material, and high densities that was causing these extreme microclimates. These are urban heat island maps for 3 smart cities. Again, they're typically used for site-specific heat mitigation strategies. So these dark red spots indicate a change of almost 0.75 degree change over the last 6 years. Last weekend, Delhi, where I live, saw record rainfalls, and the entire city was waterlogged, including parts of my own apartment. And we received the highest, I think, 24-hour rainfall this year in 121 years. And since Saturday, I think we've seen record-breaking rains in Orissa, in Rajkot, Gujarat, and all of this in the last few days. So we are definitely experiencing more extreme rainfall events, and past data also is indicative of these increasing trends. So this is data collected from rain gauges in Mumbai. We've been able to establish that the frequency of these extreme events is increasing. How do we better equip our cities to handle these changing environments? So we're building high-resolution hydrological models here to simulate flood events for varying rainfall events. So we are highlighting affected communities. Can we redesign our infrastructure with better stormwater management strategies? What happens to metro access? It allows us to provide targeted interventions for our city. Here we're working with the mayor's office on a comprehensive disaster management guidelines document for the city of Kochi. This is a climate and land use alliance project where we are accurately computing greenhouse gas inventories for Mumbai. Again, using satellite imagery to classify land use and computing removals from green cover. And for a lot of our, urban development projects, we begin our work by building these biodiversity maps. So using satellite imagery, we derive temporal changes in built-up, which invariably leads to decreasing blue-green covers and increasing surface temperatures. So, they help us prioritize localized interventions using nature-based solutions. This was also an interesting one where we looked at data for the past 20 years. We were able to plot PM 2.5 particles in Delhi. And as you can see, it's not just temporal trends. We could also assess spatial hotspots. So can we provide, some interventions to vulnerable areas such as schools and low-income communities? Can we tie these with source apportionment studies? Is the source of emission caused by traffic or waste burning? Knowing all of this can help us provide interventions at a ward or a neighborhood level. Finally, to strengthen water resilience of cities, we're looking at groundwater prospects and potential recharge zones using GIS remote sensing. And here what we've done is we've overlaid built-up growth over water recharge zones. And what we've seen is that almost 45% of new urban development has come up on areas with very high recharge potential. So an estimated 300 billion liters of water is now being diverted away from underground aquifers due to the change of these urban permeable surfaces. So by mapping these layers, it helps us understand the consequences of our past development choices and contributes to more informed decision making. If you're looking at, if you really want to look at even more maps, please do check out the Maps and Publications booth on the platform post this session. Finally, to conclude, we have all of these investments that are currently being made to improve our urban basic infrastructure. So with data-led planning, we really need to ensure that these investments deliver on the 3 pillars of our SDG goals, which are economic, environmental, and social sustainability. And finally, the bottom line is, yes, we need good data for providing meaningful, actionable insight for our cities. It's absolutely critical for us to have reliable, accurate, high-resolution data. And, this cannot be created and maintained in silos. There has to emerge better trust, transparency for better collaborations between, the government, private sector, civic society, to build a data ecosystem that is sustainable over time. So cross-sectoral data sets will allow us to come up with unique solutions that are urgently required to make our cities greener, cleaner, and more inclusive. And, with the new guidelines, I think it's definitely a progressive move, a step in the right direction. And we hope that this will lead to more evidence-based, data-driven governance and policy making. So that's all from me. I will hand it over now to my colleague Raj, who will maybe highlight a few of our data challenges that we've had in all of the projects that we do here in WRI.
Great. Thanks, Meena. Good afternoon, everyone. So, yeah, just sharing this. The applications that Beena is showing, actually, these are the current projects that we are doing as a team right now. So we have been working on lots of these projects for so long, and in retrospect, actually, we thought, you know, it's not just about the solutions, but we need to talk about the enabling environment behind these solutions. That, I mean, only then we will be able to make some interesting drives in this field. That's what we think right now. So I just want to talk about a little, I mean, on the context. This is for the general audience who are here, what we are going to discuss about, and what is this total, you know, everything for the next 1.5 hours. So geospatial data has two aspects. One is, I mean, from my view, it has two aspects. One is the civilian or the commercial applications that you see every day, which you might be using it for Swiggy or Zomato orders or whatever it is. But there is also one more side which the general public will not use, but I mean, directly they will not be using it, but indirectly it is a critical one, which is the governance, how it can be used for governance and planning. That is very critical. And these are the two aspects that we need to look at. Sometimes one gets, you know, more importance than the other, but these two are very critical in driving the industry. So with this in hand, there have been so many policies at the union level, at state level, that have been created over time to address a lot of the concerns. So some of them have been listed here. We have been doing a study on that, and we were trying to address what was the problem and what are the best ways forward with respect to policies. And I mean, if we want to do what type of work Beena was showing, at an institutional level by the government, you need to address first thing you need to address is policies. What is the enabling environment? What are the policies that are allowing you to create data, allowing you to share data, etc. And the second aspect is the institution that will execute it, right? So that is who will do these technical works. Where is the capacity for it, human resource or material resource that we want, etc. The third is the process, right? So that is something that we don't discuss a lot, but process, like even if you have institutions like what we have listed, some of the institutions over here, many of them have difficulty in doing it, whether it is, I mean, it could be different types of problems, like it could be data collection problems, even if sometimes when they collect it, they might not be accurate enough, etc., etc. There are so many issues that they are facing. So there are a few success stories within India also, but their success is always limited. And usually the success is always on the technical side of things. And how do we convert it into a decision-making, you know, success? That is what we are trying to. And we are just listing a few, you know, issues that we as an organization have faced in the past, which we think is applicable for the generic society as well, if they want to emulate what WRI is doing, or you know, those kind of things. So first is data deficiency. So I would like to always say that India is a data deficit environment, and we don't have much data about things. Even if we have data, it is not usually in the in a digital format, and even if it is in a digital format, it is not updated regularly. If it is updated regularly, it is not shared or stored properly, or it is not shared. If it is shared, it is still of high cost, and it is very difficult for people to buy. And even if it is something that you can afford, people don't have the vision to apply the data. So this is one of the biggest problems that we are seeing, from data deficiency till application, data collection till application. We are seeing a series of problems. There is underutilization of data. Our agencies have been working in silo modes and project modes, and they are not looking at it as a process. And because of these, we are still not able to, you know, take the benefit of this industry to the fullest. That's our opinion. And in one, I mean, at the end, if we, even if we demonstrate a successful application, sometimes I have seen that our technology is also oversold for issues that it can't solve. It is always thought that there will be some silver bullet from GIS and remote sensing, it will solve everything. So there is overselling as well as underselling, and we are having trouble with respect to that. It is in this context we need to look at the current policy environment and institutional environment, and that's why we are having the panel. I don't want to take more time out of this, but I just want to hand over to Ravi. So we are going to discuss about the opportunities, about the challenges that we are facing in applying these things like what Beena was showing. How do we do it? How do we replicate it? How do we scale it, right? WRI looks at scaling a lot, and it's not just us replicating it, it's about everybody doing it. One thing is that, of course, Ravi said that he is not an expert, but actually Ravi was also, he was actually a member of the Chief Minister's Committee, Karnataka Chief Minister's Committee to restructure Bengaluru. And he was instrumental in planning a particular an institution as well as a policy. He was drafting it. It is called BASIC, that is Bangalore Spatial Information Center, and you can find the documents. It's still there, and he has a lot of expertise in bringing up data and how to make it work. So how to convert data into action, and he has been leading it. And Ravi, it's all yours.
Thank you, Raj. Welcome back to all the panelists. And the 2-3 things struck me as I saw the presentation. I always knew that one of WRI's core competency was to generate phenomenal maps. And I think, Beena, your presentation showed the quality of the maps that you generate. I'm sure most of the people in the audience will be following the WRI handle. I also suggest you follow Raj Bhagat's handle, because as a hobby, he also puts out very, very interesting charts from geospatial data. And Raj, thank you so much for putting out those alphabet soup of various institutions and the like. And, though he mentioned that, I have about 2 decades of working with government pro bono, but what is less known is I call myself the patron saint of lost causes. And while Raj said it's a nice acronym, BASIC, Bangalore Spatial Information Center, the reality is, despite 20 years of lobbying, it has still not seen the light of day, but we'll come to that in the panel discussion. And I would also wait for Dr. Vijay Raghavan to join back when we can discuss some of the policy aspects. Now we will go to our panelists, and I would request Dr. Roy to initially switch on his video. Dr. Parth Sarathy Roy is an ecologist, a visiting fellow, University of Hyderabad. He's a former director of ISRO, Dehradun. He has done loads and loads of work in natural resources mapping. He's been in the field since 1977, but I don't even think terms that we are using today were mainstream. It was the pre-slide rule era in working. He has over 30 PhD students, and one of the models that he crafted on biodiversity was part of the COP11 adoption, along with Swaminathan and Kasturi Rangan. Parth Sarathy Roy, currently, Dr. Roy, the question I'd like to ask you is, you have seen this field literally evolve, given that you've been in it since 1977. Could you give us a sense of how the technology here has developed over the years, and where are we currently in terms of technology deployment in the geospatial space? Dr. Roy?
Okay, thank you. Very good afternoon, Mr. Ravichandran. I think it is a really pleasure to listen Dr. Vijay Raghavan in his keynote address. And I think the issue which he talked about, how we have reached this place, probably that was the beginning in 1972. UN Conference on Environment set the tone that environment has to be looked with the much better technologies. And that's where the 1973 United States launched a Earth observation satellite, which was called as a Earth technological satellite, and later named as a Landsat. And almost same time, I came in picture from the university. I joined University of Karlsruhe, started seeing satellite data. These were analog data, and came back after 2 years to India and joined the National Remote Sensing Center, which was a pioneer department for receiving and processing satellite data. At that time, we used to get data from the US, and they were analog form mostly, and mostly interpretations were visual interpretation, looking at the picture and getting information. Subsequently, one of the major tasks which was Professor Satish Dhawan prompted at a national level was forest cover mapping of India. And that time, the Silent Valley issue was on very hot, and people were talking about deforestation in India. And that's where the existing satellite data purchased from US NASA and the current satellite data were utilized to map the forest cover. And we had a forest statistics and which really shook the forestry sector in India. Over the years, ISRO made a quite important contribution in launching a state-of-art Earth observation satellite. They were the best at that time, and they provided data on land, ocean, for weather, weather forecasting. And all these efforts, they led to a situation where we did not buy data from US. We had our own data. Data became cheaper, and ISRO proactively promoted dissemination of data to the different stakeholders. We also demonstrated through interinstitutional collaboration how these data sets can be utilized. As it has been said, the rich countries, they have best maps, and they have up-to-date maps, the current information, because data is most valuable thing. And that is the period the whole operational concept of remote sensing came in picture. It is something like late 80s. And India started working with the stakeholder institutions and built up a potential applications in the field of natural resource management. And I can tell you India is one among the few countries which has such a comprehensive natural resource database. Somewhere during that time, India confronted some of the map issues because the maps were not open. For putting the satellite information on the map, you needed an open policy on this topographical map so that readability of the satellite products can be increased. Now, that is the period when there was a discussion came up for map policy, and there was some map policy, and topographical map were divided into two categories. One is open source maps, another one is defense related maps. But that was a very small beginning. I can tell you, world was progressing very fast. There was a satellite data, NASA made available MODIS Landsat satellite, freely available from the very beginning, 1975 onwards. These are science data. European Space Agency made data, Sentinel series of data fully free, which is about 10 meter and 5 meter ground resolution. Many of the part is covered by Planet satellite, which are again very high resolution.
I'm not sure I'm hearing you.
So there has been a parallel development in open source tools, open source processing softwares. The analytics part also came into, and that's where the integration of technology took place. GPS, GIS, and large computing system, cloud information came in picture, and requirement of more and more open policy was required. And I would say that the information on the position became very important, and the entrepreneurship, building a business, required a position data, and that's where the technology demanded open map policy, and that I consider that the present geospatial policy, which has been announced by the present government, has been a major milestone. However, the new policy which has come on drone is also a major milestone. However, if you want to make this data set open, you need further policy level changes, which makes data for scientific analysis. You have a open policy for sharing the existing data sets for monitoring purposes. You also need a certain kind of informations like topographical information, the science-based corrected satellite data for analysis and processing. I think I will stop here, and I will come back if the required. I am asked to answer some questions and queries. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. We will be coming back to some of the issues that you have raised, particularly in the light of the new policy, which has very good features, but could have a few more about information sharing protocols and the like. And also heartening to see that in our journey since 77, there's been a lot of adoption of open standards, and which really is the way for a country like India to go over getting locked up with any proprietary software. I would next like to go to Dr. Anjana Vyas. I mean, she has over 40 years of experience here in academics and research. Dr. Vijayaraghavan, I must mention, you twice called me a doctor. I am no doctor, I'm a Mr. But for half an hour, I said, let me enjoy my doctor status. So just a little correction out there. But this panel does have pretty weighty doctors, and Dr. Vyas is one of them. Apart from academics and research, I think she's a pioneer who developed a master's course for geomatics. She's been specialized in remote sensing, GIS, urban planning, governance, data science, has been part of international archives on photogrammetry, remote sensing. She's been the chairperson, part of expert committees at DST. I could go on, but you get the sense. Dr. Vyas, my interest in where you're coming from really, because people keep talking about capacity building, and you cannot attend a seminar without the word capacity building being used. And you are at the epicenter for geospatial in a certain sense. So give us a sense of what is the state of education. And you have a belief that we need more of an interdisciplinary approach and not just a silo-based approach. I would like you to elaborate on that. You also have some ideas about how to strengthen academia, industry, government kind of partnerships operating out of academia. And the thing I found most interesting talking to you ahead of this session, you said that there's a chance to catch them young, that even geography classes in school can be taught with an element of spatial thinking. So I'd like you to elaborate on a few of these things to give us a sense of where we are in this whole area of geospatial education. Over to you, Professor Vyas.
Yeah, thank you so much for a very apt question on education. Education is always considered for the establishing the base and basis for the further growth processes. When we are talking about geospatial technology and what Professor Parthasarathy has talked about is a process of the growth of the remote sensing and geospatial technology in India, and how it is paced with the kind of keeping the and helping hand to the academics and academicians. We know that Indian Institute of Remote Sensing, one of the most pioneer academic institution, I think it is 55 years plus old, and has been giving education and capacity programs to cross the sectors and domains in government or in the infrastructure, environment, water, etc. Igniting the mind of youth of the people, young generation, is very important thing, and hence we require the standard education system. And this standard education system for this geospatial technology is very, very important. In India, across 200 institutions and universities are today giving the education at less number in graduation, but large number in the post-graduation and PhD level. We have been, Raj has shown some of the policies, and we have been looking into the policy, starting with the map policy and to the use policy and to the dissemination aspect of the policy. Not going to very old type of policies, but we said that National Map Policy of 2005 or National Geospatial Data Infrastructure of 2006, and so on, remote sensing data policy. Several policies has come up as and when the space technology has grown in India, and we have grown with the kind of new and updated and enhanced the policy. The task force, this national task force during 2013 has very prominently have shown the importance of the geospatial education, and it is mentioned the requirement of the geospatial education, the skilled workforce. And they said that the education should be intermingling with respect to three typology of workforce to be produced. One is requirement of a skilled labor workforce. Second is the technical geospatial professionals. And third is the geospatial experts or managers. And we know that there is always a professional market pyramid, and that pyramid needs to be taken care of with respect to the larger to the smaller and expertise level of understanding of that. So recently, this education has probably is getting more and more encouraged by the people, and very recent inclusion by ICT in the approving of the geospatial technology subject in this national eligibility test, NET and GATE, and these are all is very important aspect of happening of this geospatial education in this world. And again, as you have rightly mentioned, that recent education policy, which I consider is a cross-border education, it is not in the domain of the one what you are learning. You are learning medical or engineering or any other thing. What is most important is that would you need to learn psychology, or would you need to learn the financial management, or what you really need to know, and if that are possible to access to those kind of things through the new policy. I think geospatial technology umbrella has opened up quite drastically, because it has a potentiality of location as well as business intelligence, and both are required in any type or any kind of the requirement of the domains. Now, when we talk about the education, there are I come out with two important things. One is the education level, content and pedagogy, and another one is the post your study, what is your professional happenings. Okay. So whichever is the degree specialization go for is always recognized only when they fetch good professional career and good number of jobs. We see that our neighboring nations, or maybe in the Western world, geospatial technology graduates are getting very good job, and it's considered to be top 5 or top 10 jobs. The situation in India is really differ. Okay, but GOI, Government of India initiatives are also time and again they enhances the scales for JRF, SRF, but probably there still may be a lesser in terms of the other graduates from other specializations from elsewhere or something. So, but then if we consider that some of these aspects, why this is not happening, or geospatial technology is not becoming more and more popular by the young people to learn and study. One of the committee report, when I was reading, it is written that actual scope of geospatial sector is not realized due to the lack of awareness. Now, this is a very critical question for the academician, for the government, for the industry, and I think entire ecosystem of geospatial technology, that having eminent institution completing 55 years, having the policy so old, 70s, and we have started bringing the satellite data and giving to the people, why it is still not having an awareness? And here we have to take a proactive step in terms of demand, raise the demand for the skilled, geospatially skilled people, okay, and manpower. And how it is also, we can just try to take it up is also with respect to the strong industry linkages. Now, that is for two purposes. One is for training, what industry needs, academia can try to figure it out along with the industry linkage and then try to give it to them. And another one is the placement. So training and placement, enhancing or strengthening of these two things will obviously enhance the geospatial education in India, and the young generation will really get ahead in terms of learning more and more. Just last word I would tell that today the employment of in the nation level, employment of geospatial graduates are only 250,000. It is quoted in AGI, one of the document. Okay, and like 250,000 people in entire India is employed. So what is the problem? And these problems are really needs to be looked into, that how we can just enhance that, to what scale, and then only we can try to address that committee's comment on that geospatial is lack of awareness. And I think we should get onto this discussion further more detail in time to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vyas, and you make very relevant points that, studying geospatial and geomatics should be an aspirational thing. There should be placement and training, and maybe we'll request WRI to scale up their geospatial division as a first step. Moving on, I'm going to bring in Dr. Vinod Botale, who's the Associate Director of NRSC ISRO in Hyderabad. It's from IIT Roorkee. He calls himself as self-taught in GIS. So Professor Vyas, he didn't know of your existence at that point of time. So he has managed ground segment for satellite data acquisition processing and watershed development in Rajasthan. From what I gathered from Dr. Botale, his focus over the years, particularly the last decade, has been on software solutions, the NRIS, the India Virus, the Bhuvan portal, and the like. So, Dr. Botale, my question to you really is, you have now dealt in terms of when you come up with these software solutions, there are certain things that you think are required, and there are some that you elicit from potential users. Give us a sense in terms of what's the state of software solutions in the space currently. And secondly, in terms of this elicitation of user requirements and the like, how evolved are we and mature are we in terms of being able to define that? Dr. Botale.
Thank you, Dr. Ravichandran.
Oh, my, Mr. Please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ravichandran. And it's really a great pleasure to be here. And we could get a very nice keynote address from Professor Vijay Raghavanji. And it's always good to see him, his pleasant face, and always good points. I think this third or fourth time I'm in discussion when he was chairing the meeting. And I think the previous was when he chaired the 9th PM-STIC, Science and Technology Innovation Council, where I was one of the invitees for specifically the geospatial sector, making the infrastructure and data strategy. I think that is also one of the could be point which has taken forward by him very seriously, the inputs received during this thing. And today we have geospatial data guidelines in place, and also the drone rules. And I think a lot of efforts have been made by the government so that the data is open and more usable to the people. Now, with regard to your specific points, one more thing which what we have to see is that today is a very important day, I feel, because one is that Engineers Day, a very important occasion. And in this week also, we are completing 6 years. Into September 2015, Honorable Prime Minister had conducted a national meet where he addressed the various departments to how to use the space technologies in their governance. And since today's topic is governance and planning, I will be a little focused specifically in terms of software solutions. Since I was involved in from 90s when the first GIS, that time it was of course commercial GIS which came into India, and we started using it for providing solution to the Rajasthan government for watershed information system and ravine reclamation kind of things. So from that journey, I could see the actual development with the users, something like India WRI-India, wherein there was a proactive initiative from the Ministry of Water Resources, Central Water Commission, to come out with a countrywide water level information system. So user requirement, when we talk about specifically, this is a proactive step where some user is coming out with a problem. They have defined the various problems wherein you need to design a solution. This is one thing which wherein actually the solution becomes easier to do because your problems are known. You need to design, you need to analyze, and then develop, test, and deploy. There are certain initiatives, like for example now Bhuvan. I have been also the founding member, and a few people initially launched Bhuvan with a self-conceived idea of you can say more with anticipating the needs of the possibly the decision-making portal. Earlier, like as you mentioned about the National Resources Information System project, which was the first initiative in India in the digital domain. It was digital domain wherein district level databases have been prepared, and decision makers, like specifically like collectors, they had been given the digital databases along with the decision making tools. But subsequently, when we look into the Bhuvan, it actually took that kind of backend, but it make it web enabled so that it becomes and it becomes a common framework, which is a you can say the proactively developed one, which is a generic solution, but it can be customized further for any particular ministry or any particular user. But in this case, when the user requirement comes, because this is already a generalized developed portal, many times user requirements are a little fuzzy or maybe not not well known. So sometimes you have to anticipate and develop the things. So whenever there is a reactive kind of mechanism, wherever user has already defined the problem and solution is being to develop, it becomes fast. But whenever there is a proactive, whenever there is a proactive solution problem the user, it becomes fast. When there is a reactive mechanism that you are developing something common portal and then you are expecting from something else come, there naturally the life cycle of the solution making becomes difficult. Now in this particular era, when you would see that India, the Geospatial Readiness Index, if we look into last 2-3 years survey, which was done by the market, India stood 26th in the 50 nation list. It means we are just in the middle, where it shows that in next 5 years, the global geospatial solution market is going to touch something like $700 billion. And we are 26. Definitely, we have large scope to improve further. Use this the mechanism which has been opened up by the government in various sectors. It is not only for the private, but even in the government, where entire workflows of the departments could be put in the automated way, and a decision making and such solutions can be given. And if user requirements flows very fluidly, if there is something like a geospatial advisor in each department who talks to the department internals and then come out with some plan, which can be further put in place, it could be a really great solution to use this opportunity. In this case, we say, okay, so geospatial solution market is directly impacted by the user requirements. So well thought requirements reduces the time for the whole solution base. So most of the geospatial based workflows, if we implement, it can be really great. Today, one example I can just give you very useful example. Ministry of Rural Development, which has taken and Bhuvan has implemented Manrega scheme. So essentially, this entire workflow has been implemented, and it's a very nice combination, synergy combination between the Department of Space and the NIC, where the handholding has been carried out. So wherever every work which is carried out on ground gets into the workflow, their pictures come on daily basis, work progress is being seen, and then even the initiation for the payment is being done from the Bhuvan. It goes to the clearance to NIC portal, and further it happens. So entire workflow gets automated. So here the actual governance scheme can be seen here. Another good example could be in urban sector, it could be like housing for all, wherein again, same thing, the housing for all scheme, which is specifically meant for the weaker sections, where the weaker beneficiary has to be get an advantage of that. Entire workflow has been automated to see the progress right from the no progress to the foundation level, to the lintel level, to the slab level, to the completion level, and finally handing over to the beneficiary. So such kind of mechanisms or ease of business, which has been used by Ministry of Culture today to provide the building permissions from the Bhuvan portal. So such kind of initiatives where there is a initiation from the departments and more of a job becomes simpler in terms of user requirements and building a solution. It's a great opportunity. So now, in this slide, I would say that a kind of mechanism, if we, along with this geospatial data guidelines, which has now paved the way for various application sectors to boom, I will say, because micro level details specifically, which were not able to get, this policy will allow such kind of details to get, and actions or solutions are very important. If they're actionable, they become more and more important and more relevant. So if solution is important, but solution should be action oriented, and we must go for the descriptive and prescriptive business intelligence henceforth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Botle. And it's heartening to note that a lot of these are finding practical applications, and you mentioned Manrega and some of the other applications. Thank you so much. Next we go, to Nikhil Kumar, who's the President Geospatial WRI-India. Whether you're Prime Minister or Finance Minister, over the years, they keep talking about that we must unleash the animal spirits in the market. That's a commonly used phrase. And on this panel, Nikhil Kumar would represent the animal spirits, given that he's in the private sector market of the geospatial space. He has over 27 years in the field, earlier at Here Technologies before joining WRI-India recently. And when I was talking to him, he actually made my job a bit simple by providing a 4-pillar ecosystem framework to think about geospatial ecosystem. So over to you, Nikhil.
Thank you, Ravi. It was great. And thank you, WRI, for this opportunity to have such a great panel and confabulate and discuss with this elite panel. So I will begin with some handful of thanks and gratitude. This is 15th February, after 15th February and before 15th February. So Raj was mentioning a lot of policies which were not very, conducive for the geospatial industry to work upon. But that's gone. 15th February onwards, we see a completely liberated policy already in place. And being in private sector, we can actually see how this is kind of helping. So, and then further accentuated by their own policy. So these two are, we must express our gratitude as part of industry, WRI-India, my CMD and CEO, Mr. Verma, Rakesh Verma and Rohan Verma, for this enormous space. And of course, letting the animal unleash is just taking your phrase forward. Now, I will talk here, since it is under the aegis of this new policy we are talking. A lot of people talk to me that, a lot of geospatial work was already happening. What has happened on 15th February and what impact it could make? That's one thing that we'll talk about. The second thing I will talk about, the question that you asked me, when we were getting into this conversation. Where are we? Where do we want to go? And what do we need to make that happen? So these are the two things I will talk on. But before I go to that level, I will just take a step back and see what is the 4 pillars that we spoke about the other day. So the way I look at, and I will try to align as to how this new policy has impacted in unleashing this animal. So one is, the way I look at is the one frame, which is one pillar, which is the user community. And what are those and who are those? So one is the data creators, and not necessarily they are data owners. Somebody I heard before this, there was another session by Geospatial World, and somebody said, no, I see data as a sunlight. Well, very true. For the fact that it should be, in terms of the virtue, ubiquitous to all, it is a sunlight. But when we talk about data also as a fuel, there has to be ownership. And there is a premium that somebody has to earn out of owning that. So yeah, so the one is the data creators who either do it for themselves, they own it, do it for others. So that's one part. The second part is the prosumers. And that's where I will bring in this enhanced understanding of geospatial as contextual convergence of technology, wherein a lot of applications are happening worldwide. And the reason why in geospatial industry, we are still not been able to evolve big time, because we are keeping everything, within the boundaries. So our ability to create, geospatial context into huge sets of application, starting from gamification to socioeconomic application to monitoring of direct benefit schemes, you can name it, agriculture, all that kind of things required that the people who are developing these applications are not the core geospatial guys. So how we enable them, and that's where I bring in this prosumer varieties, who actually ingest all this location context into various applications that they are unfolding. And the third is the consumer, and the consumer could be me, you, everybody, large businesses, organizations, who are actually making the benefit out of this application and the data. So that's one paradigm. The second paradigm for me is the geospatial technology continuum, which is, people create it, which is starting different type of technology in use. Dr. P.S. Roy talked about Earth observatory, satellite imageries, drone is another way. Then we have terrestrial data capture, which is LiDAR. We have optical sensors, we have GNSS, all that. Government of India also came out a very important step on CORS, continuously operating reference station, because however accurate the data you capture, if it's not actually aligned with a uniform coordinate frame, it will miss the higher objectives. So that's different level, different types of data created from different means and different technology. So that's one part in the continuum frame. The second is the processing and modeling. I believe that data is a data, and it gets converted into a content when it is extended for use in your application. So this conversion of raw data or data into content, there is a huge industry. People make software which allows you to manipulate, manage, model the data based on the actual uses and the application. So that's the second frame. The third frame, once you have created that content, you like to visualize it, analyze it. And this could be enormous. Any sector that you talk about, I don't need to go in detail of that. So that's the third segment. And fourth, when we have analyzed it, visualized it, created it, somebody might require just the data, somebody might require just the content, somebody might require the visualized analytics. How do you extend that? And that's what I'm saying, publishing and sharing, whether it is a portal, whichever way you do it. So these are the four of the geospatial continuum side. And the third is for me, which is how do you, in terms of when you extend it, are you doing offline? Even earlier days, people used to give CDs. Or you are actually doing that on an online mode, an offline mode, a hybrid mode, if there is a business layer which is very confidential and that cannot be disseminated openly. Of course, you have to adhere to the sanctity of the data and still provide the backend engine to entice various applications around it. So it could be hybrid, or it could be on-prem, or it could be online. That's the model of engagement or model of deployment. So, and the fourth is different ministries, different sectors using it, whether it is, and that could be diverse. somebody can say, okay, how can commercialization can happen? Like you asked me, where do you see? I mean, we are a big industry making huge impact. If we are through use of geospatial technology saving a life, it's a huge impact. You cannot put $1 around it. But what I would like to see that also is achieved. We can also put $1 and say, okay, our industry, which we are planning to have 1 lakh crore by 2030, we are actually able to achieve that, which is real commercial gain, and the industry will benefit. A whole ecosystem will be created. We will impact the GDP through the geospatial industry itself. So that's the wish list I have, and I will come as to how we'll achieve that. So these are the sectors that I was talking, and I was talking two different and diverse sectors. One is the socio-economic side, which is agriculture, more crop per drop, precision agriculture. We required huge amount of precision in the way we, right from the field preparation to crop management to harvesting, the entire continuum of agriculture, how geospatial find a way. And I'm not going to teach here because everybody knows that it's useful. So I'm not here talking about where is GIS useful. I'm just trying how this benefit, post this policy, these are the sectors which are going to benefit. And I will come one by one on that. So this is a socio-economic. If you see the large industrial or commercial sectors, how geospatial has spurred, and it's likely to do more. So we were saying car, autonomous car, in-dash navigation, everybody, you and I have seen, navigation in a car, which was a simple car, offline dashboard. From there, it became, a connected car. From connected car, it became car as a service. From car as a service, it became mobility as a service. And that's where, Bina was alluding to when she was talking about urban harmonization. And geospatial will play not only a role from providing accurate and precision, navigation, but also connecting different dots and providing you a lot in the sense of over the air, management of the entire fleet. So that's one sector. Supply chain logistics, 14% is our transportation cost in India. We need to reduce that using this geospatial. So these are the sectoral aspect on the commercial side and on the socio-economic side. So the value I'm trying to see from the policy that has seen is the areas which we could not do. We cannot map every POI. Today we can, and that as a service we can provide, which will actually provide huge amount of benefit to these commercial sectors that I talked about. The benefits, direct benefit schemes, lot of social, like Anganwadi, which areas that cater to, that requires every household to be geo addressed. All these kind of remote area which were not accessible through drone, we can map. We can provide health services to those locations, find a proof of delivery and stamp it on our geospatial layer. So these are the segments which we could not do earlier freely, which we can do freely. The construction segment, which requires not only, sir.
Yeah, so thanks, Nikhil. We'll come back to that because we're running a little out of time. And I know the next part you wanted to talk was governance and policy.
Yeah.
And the panel discussion will focus on the governance and policy. So thank you so much for laying out the entire 4 pillars and the various areas that it can be used. We will come to governance and policy, which you wanted to move to once we get to the panel discussion. My last speaker for the day is Meera of Citizen Matters and Urvani Foundation. She's the co-founder as well as the managing trustee of the foundation. I'm also linking a question that has come from Valiyappan Manikam of Trustee Water Collaborators, saying that why is community ignored when we talk about all these spatial data sets and the like? So Meera, since you have done a lot of work with finding this data, which WRI seems to easily get the data, which you have a lot of difficulty getting, how you try to put that data available for citizens out there through your open data platform. And you work with a lot of communities in trying to get them to understand the data, contribute to the data. So will you please give us a sense of what is the community hunger for data and your experience of working in this space? And Meera, we normally say we are citizen-centric. I'm sorry, but we have come to the citizen at the last end of the speakers. Over to you, Meera.
Thanks, Ravi. I don't know if that speaks for itself, that I'm the last in the list. But yeah, just to kind of share my experience, having been in the civic space in the last so many years, the 2 things I have learned. So one is that data, including spatial data, is central to better governance and civic engagement. Okay, and more importantly, people really, really care about data. Right now, with the ubiquitousness of smartphones, people are used to seeing maps. It's the concept of spatial information is internalized now. So it's not something that only academics and experts actually engage with. Average people, lay people on the streets actually understand spatial data. And now, especially people who are involved in civic issues really care about it. So, they're looking for kind of the quantitative information that helps them understand the state of their neighborhoods, their city. They want to see budgets and expense, spatial view of all the projects that are going on, and what is the planned work, how is it going to affect my street, what is the various, the state of execution, and so on. So people actually, feel this is something that matters, and it matters to them in their daily lives, right? These are the pain points that people go through. But unfortunately, data, especially in the civic space, and maybe true for all spaces, is sort of stuck in silos, or it's missing. Even your city corporation, for example, today's, there was this news about replacing all the street lights with LED lamps, and then, and still large parts of the city are in darkness. Like, where is the data of list of, let's say, the streetlight assets? Does the city actually have something like that? And if it's not, how do you actually, go and gather that? So that's one of the reasons that, to complement our work as at Citizen Matters, which is a civic media platform, we have an open data platform, an urban data platform called Open City. So where we are the collators, the curators, and the editors. One, we focus on opening up data, collating data, and we also do collaborative data gathering, because even within the government there are data sets which are missing, and it's sort of natural in a developing country, but it's something it is possible to work together and fill these gaps, is the point we're trying to make, right? So there have been many of these citizen science projects, like mapping which are the garbage spots, which are the trees in a neighborhood, biodiversity, street lights, for example. So, and we also have people actually reaching out and asking for data. Do you have this map? Do you have this sort of budget document, etc.? So the goal overall is to, we're talking about data-driven decision making, but the idea is to bring citizen participation into it. So it's not just about the decision making part, but it also brings in the, the transparency and accountability, right? I think Nikhil Kumar talked about sunlight, and sunlight is also the best disinfectant. So from that perspective, we see people using the data. Like I said, we also see journalists, not just in Citizen Matters, but as well as civic groups actually using this data for their advocacy, their lobbying, and there to inform their us, like, not just to go and say, hey, we don't have enough toilets in the public toilets in the neighborhood, but you actually have data to show that in a city of 12 million, we have 600, 700 toilets, and your per capita availability really doesn't make sense when you plot it on a map, where things are missing. So let me end by with a couple of examples. I talked about the street lights, right? There were a couple of projects which actually where citizens went out and mapped this information. There was a cyclist, Anita, who went and mapped 650 street lights in 6 hours. And that was so informative. It kind of proved the point that entire ORR sections, the heart of the IT city, is actually in darkness every evening. Right? And people are going about in cars, they don't realize it. But what about people who are walking on the pavements, or rather the missing pavements? So this kind of proved the point, and it's just so much easier to go and then demand, better services from the city. And there was another neighborhood which actually went and did an audit of their neighborhood. They created a step-by-step guidance saying, this is what we found, and this is, if you in your neighborhood want to do something, these are the steps you follow. So it's really a very powerful way to kind of work with data and use it to make better cities. So that's, I just wanted to kind of share that, and there's just lots more we can dive into.
Thank you. So we now have about 20 minutes, 25 minutes for the focus on governance and planning. And I'd like to get that kicked off with some remarks by myself, with my own experience. And Dr. Vijay Raghavan, I will be coming with the opening question to you post my little monologue. So essentially, Raj earlier referred to the basic project, the Bangalore Spatial Information Center, which over 2 decades one has worked in trying to put that together in terms of evangelizing it, in terms of collecting a base map and all the application layers, putting it together and say, can we run with it? Can we have an information protocol, sharing protocol on who will update the base map, who will update the respective application layers? What will be the protocol for interagency sharing? What will be the protocol for sharing with the public and the like? It has come to naught at one level. So the question I want to come in, before that, a few more context. The February policy of the government, both in terms of the geospatial policy that has come out, which makes people like Nikhil Kumar smile, because a license Raj in some sense has been dismantled. And we are often so much caught up in the Stockholm syndrome that even if we see small things getting removed, we are very delighted saying that there is huge progress. But the geospatial policy and thing that has come out from the government is clearly path-breaking. And so also is the drone policy. And both those must be acknowledged. At the same time, we realize that while the central government says this, a lot of the action finally is in the state government. Delhi today has a geospatial act, but most other places don't have it. So we'll have to figure out how to make it happen in the state level. Before I come specifically to my question, and what can government do about it, I'd like to share. So when I was evangelizing this idea with the political establishment and I'd met a former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court with a query saying that, can we find a way, and this is again ties up with the question that Valyappan asks, why can't citizens verify things on the ground that government owns? That's the question that he has asked. In the same context, when I've gone to the former Justice of the Supreme Court and posed the following question, that if the government of the day for lakes of Bangalore put out a map showing the lake bed and the buffer zone, which is put out in the public domain, that this belongs as urban commons. And if a citizen or a citizen group saw encroachment there, they could then make a representation saying that we see an encroachment on the urban commons. And the question to the justice was, if citizens came to you in the court, assuming the government didn't really respond, can we really crunch court cases and get good resolution? The answer of the Supreme Court justice was yes, yes, yes. All it will require, government puts it out. We will set up a committee which will verify whether the representation is correct on the ground in terms of the encroachment claimed. Is it happened or not happened? And if it is found that it has happened, we can immediately issue orders to restore status quo and protect the commons. I could extend the example to forests and to other places. So it begs the basic question. And when I went back to government, informally I was told that the biggest problem is you're seeking transparency in an environment which is inherently opaque. You spoke about power and asymmetry. The power and asymmetry that government has with government data sets created with citizen taxpayers' money is huge. So my question, sir, is what is the step we can take, baby steps, that we can actually encourage a little more transparency, a little more data sharing? Because if you look at London and San Francisco and the like, all these data sets that we are struggling here are available. And actually private developers are developing solutions, whether it be mobility solutions or water leakage solutions, whatever. The private is actually using these and developing solutions, crowdsourced, tribal wisdom, wisdom of the crowds, whatever you want to call it. Why can't we think down that route? What's holding back? I can understand legacy issues and the desire for lack of transparency, but what could be done to incentivize government to be more open? Can your funds be tied in saying, we will have an index of transparency before we release more money? Something of that kind, because for too long, this asymmetry is affecting the citizen. Dr. Vijay Raghavan.
We are dealing with questions which have multiple complexities and multiple players and multiple responsibilities. And we're trying to see whether there can be a unipolar solution from the government, right? And in a situation where legally as well as functionally, there are multiple layers of governance, and each of these layers has an interface with citizens and those who elect the government, who the government is responsible to. So there are two major challenges here. One is you have addressed largely the one of process. What is the process which can be effective? And that's important, and I'll come to that. The second is a challenge of culture, right? Do we have a culture where the implementation of rules applies to me even when it is inconvenient to me? Or do I want those rules applied only when it is convenient to me, and I demand that the rules be applied to everyone else, but I am an exception, right? And so this is a major cultural issue of exceptionalism in functioning. You would like the riverbed not to be occupied by construction, but if you have made an offer you couldn't refuse for a plot of land there to construct a bungalow, somehow you feel that, okay, that's an exception which can be managed. Or violating a rule which requires you not to build another floor on your building, and so on and so forth. Violating norms of disaster resilience in construction. So there are cultural issues and process issues both here. And I think we do ourselves no favors by pushing only on the process issue and not on the cultural issue. Now, what is the solution? Both need to be addressed. I think here technology actually has a role. You talked about how you can map lakes or riverbeds and say that this is an encroachment or not, and the government should have a map of what is a region. But we also already know as citizens what regions are okay to construct and what are not, what is an encroachment and what is not. And the geospatial policy, the drone policy, allows you to map this and put this up publicly and make it available to everyone. In other words, every citizen should be empowered to see what is the law on encroachment and whether there's an encroachment or not, and put that information back to the government. So this is at the citizens level. So that kind of a responsibility makes it difficult for anyone, those who are citizens who are misusing the situation, or government, which in some context may be not noticing or turning a blind eye, to look at these kinds of issues. The last point I'd like to say is a third kind of cultural issue, which is a big challenge. And this is a common challenge across both people and government and societies. And this is a syndrome which both forgets calamities very rapidly and somehow doesn't look at disaster assessment in a manner which is meaningful from a societal context. In other words, the floods in Jhelum, if it occurs every 50 years, then for 49 years after the flood, if you live a life which is not keeping in mind that another flash flood will occur in about 15 years, then you cannot pretend to be surprised when the flood comes later. But the urge to make a living on attractive, high-value riverbeds for 49 years is a challenge. So this is a matter which is there across. I'm giving Jhelum as an example, but this is true of every kind of situation. People build apartments in seismic zones in California because they are by the coast, and they just hope that the big one will not happen. So these kinds of issues are both cultural and process issues which we need to do, and I think there can be a fix by using technology by common people, by citizens, to say that look, these are things which are not on.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I buy your point on the cultural thing that you stressed on, and it is clear that citizens have a responsibility to be good citizens and not violate the rules and the laws. And it's equally the onus of government to be good, provide good governance. So it is both sides. I'm not saying that, but the point that is often made is that citizens have yes, we do cut across traffic lights, we do build extra floors. I am not for a minute absolving citizenry. But the point I was trying to really get at is from a purely government side, because we covered government a little less in the overall scheme of things. Why not they do things a little more proactively as opposed to be in this whole obfuscation kind of mode? And you mentioned disaster, and quick data point I'm sharing. Again, it's a process point of view. While I was working with the system pro bono, I was in the government committee on restructuring. While going to various departments to try and put the geodata set together, I noticed that the disaster management agency was working off a 1:9 map. And I realized, ignoramus me, I realized that the BDA in its latest base map for the master plan had a 1:3 map. And they were in silos, not willing to share with each other. I had to write a note and request the chief secretary to authorize the BDA to hand over the 1:3 map to the disaster management, which could then do a better modeling. Now, this is not rocket science. The point, therefore, the related point is most things that we as citizens require integration across silos of government department designed to withstand nuclear attack. So we need actually integration for outcomes. So is there any thinking in government? How do we get this coordination across? Because most of our structures from the British down have been these silos which get reinforced. Any ways to break those silos and think outcomes and integration? Any thinking along those lines, sir?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is an area where there's not only thinking, this has been the focus of substantial kinds of measures which are being taken with, I would say, a not insignificant amount of success over here. I'll give you some examples, not directly connected with geospatial policy, but geospatial is an example. So the whole policy changes came about exactly because of the kinds of synergy which you mentioned. In theory, it is the Department of Science and Technology which is responsible for bringing out these policies and the guidelines and so on and so forth. And of course, that's true in theory and in practice. But the way they did that was extraordinary. They met with industry to a great extent, with citizens, with other ministries, and there are a whole lot of ministries: the defense, the home affairs, Panchayati Raj, everyone else who I discussed with, and each of them have their own views about what can be done and what can't be done. But it's rather remarkable that there was an intention to open up. That was true about drones, about geospatial, and it's also about the space restructuring. So the space restructuring again, I'll give you this example because it's particularly relevant to what you're talking about. Now, space had for a long time outlined what it thought was necessary in the area of remote sensing and putting out satellites for biodiversity, for education, for mapping waterways, for looking at Himalayan ecosystems and melting, and so on and so forth. Now, all of this, each of these components is linked to potentially a user ministry and to state governments and so on and so forth. And before putting that up, Space used to ask these people, do you think this is a good idea? And they would say, absolutely wonderful. Not only this, we would like so much more. We would like, LiDARs, and we would like these other kinds of surveys and all of that. And Space used to say, wonderful, and put up appropriate satellites. Then it was discovered, because none of the user ministries were actually paying for this, right? They had the generous heart to say what they wanted, and Space put it up. Use was not optimal. This changed dramatically, a few months ago, about a year ago, when Space now puts up satellites only by the demand of the user ministries of industry, and they have a stake, they pay for the satellites going up, even if only in part. And then once it becomes a line item in their ministries, then they demand, why haven't you put the satellite up in time, or is it working properly? And is there functionality and so on. So some amount of responsibility comes in that way, that kind of synergy is there. But you're right. I mean, this is the biggest challenge in all our functioning, breaking away from silos. I could go on and on about the many examples we're trying to do.
Sure.
And the Principal Scientific Advisors Office, particularly in the areas of science and technology, is to work to break these kinds of silos across the ecosystems. And that's something, again, which we're trying to do.
Thank you. Now we have another 10 minutes, and here's how we are going to do. Each of our speakers have 1.5 minutes to set out your wish list of what you would like to see. It could be what you would like to see from citizenry, from private sector providers, from government in the area of geospatial governance policy. So we will now start in the reverse order. So Meera, your 1.5 minutes. So hopefully, Dr. Vijay Raghavan will make some notes, and maybe 1 or 1.25 may get implemented. So it's just a wish list, positive, constructive wish list of what you would like to see change in the space that we are talking about. And it could be about any aspect that you feel relevant from your perspective. Meera, you go first.
Thanks, Ravi. First and foremost, I would like all governments, center, state, at the city level as well, to actually liberate data, right? There is the guideline talks about geospatial data created with public money would be made accessible in a fair and transparent pricing manner. I don't know what is fair and transparent. I'm saying as civic groups, as average citizens, these are not startups, trying to make money from an app. We need access to data. Right? It has to be opened up. In fact, now if you look at the kind of attention paid to India Stack and some of these, this is kind of personal information. It's easier to access than information which is related to public goods, right? So I think we need more effort and attention paid to public information, and something like a lake boundary or a city bus route, BMTC data is not still available in GTFS format. So the point is to open up that. So that is my first and foremost requirement. The second thing is to also departments need to internalize open data and raw data, not just for example, today in data.gov there is a data set submitted from Rajya Sabha saying number of highway projects by state. Why are we just talking about one little table? Why aren't each of those projects actually mapped and details of those projects provided? So that's a kind of granularity is also important to understand and make sense of that information, right? And third and finally, it is about collaborating with citizens. There are enough people who care. Bangalore is a great example. People want to contribute and make it a better city. So work with citizens, listen to citizens, use spatial data in public hearings and interaction. If there's data missing, people are ready to help. We can go collate. It's very possible. So would love for the government to actually reach out and actually work with the community.
Thanks, Meera. Liberate data, see everything, put everything out spatially, and collaboration is the way forward. Nikhil, you go next. You're going in the reverse order of the speakers. Yeah.
Perfectly all right. Last time when you allowed me to speak with a phrase saying "animal unleashed," I actually took it literally. So, so coming back to that, my wish list, I actually alluded to that already. The two parts. One is what is that as an industry we should be doing. And to enhance the relevance, not only limited to disaster management, life saving, but also commercially, because then we have better audience and more voice and more impact we can make. So that's one. And second, co-ownership and co-creation with government in the national level platform. All these large government program where we, as a PPP, one of the things that I can tell you, which has spurred post 15th February, is Meera. It is opening up of a very old organization to 50 years old organization, Survey of India, opening its portal for everybody. That's a big step, and that could not have happened had these guidelines not been made public. So I would like to see far more such things wherein we as Map My India engages with the government for all the national level program, whether it is logistics platform, it is Jan Arogya Yojana, it is Poshan Abhiyan, all these big large programs, we can contribute a lot, and a proper structuring in a PPP model. The modalities cannot be discussed here because that's a lot of nuances are there, but a step in that direction, encouraging the private players to play a big role in co-ownership and co-creation.
Thank you, Nikhil. So better PPP structuring as well as co-creation possibilities. Dr. Botale.
Yeah, good afternoon once again. Yeah, I think wish list is really a big one, but I will just try to converge on one which is combination of all. So what I see, I feel that what Mira ma'am was mentioning, I assume that data will be available because sir has taken so much big initiative, and I am sure that it will be going in a big way. And this, I don't see any issues in availability of the data in the current time. It will be definitely available. So with this availability of the data, I feel that the technologies like digital twin, which is basically a combination of geospatial technologies, Internet of Things, big data, artificial intelligence and machine learning, citizen science, and all together comes together, which solves the problem of near real-time or real-time decision making. Sir was mentioning about that government gets time of 1 week or some time. So essentially, if we want to make the decision making faster, we need to not only bring the real world into the virtual, but also build the dynamics of that. Today, for example, a grain is there in the godown, unless whether that godown is having proper air conditioning, whether the environmental parameters are mentioned or maintained or not, what is the condition of that, everything has to be monitored along with that replica. So virtual world, creating a virtual world from the real world and putting all the dynamics parameters so that we get a real feel of whole realism and give the solutions to the real world problems. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Botale. To yours, I would add one more wish list, that there is increased use of evidence-based decision making in everything that we do. So one would really like to also see, because once that happens, there'll be more hunger for data and putting it out there. I find Professor Vyas is not on the screen.
In this case, as of now, although digital twin is the much demand, but the plateau of productivity, what is told is something like 5 to 10 years. But I am sure, I think we will be able to make in 5 years with the young minds and all coming together, government, private, academia. I think everybody is, I think, in high spirits now. Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. Professor Vyas, your wish list, 1.5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. First is I think that we should have a very strong geospatial ecosystem. We need to have 4-dimensional strength to be improved with respect to education, industry, use of geospatial data by stakeholders so that it repeatedly gets enhanced and updated and upgraded, as well as we can have this collaboration between industry, academia, as well as government. What I would like to see is that revamping the geography subject in the school level, where map making can be changed or upgraded to preparation and understanding of the map, where one can identify several aspects of the map. Then we need to look into few things. One is the formation of the research lab with geographically spreaded at multiple locations equipped with maps and data accessibility, directory of mentors and advisors for the students to get best resources, compilation of best practices and success stories, sensitization and awareness workshops, appreciation medals and prizes of encouraging more students to learn geospatial technology. And ultimately, the last thing is the stakeholders collaboration, where I use a word, say, together. So together we work, together we achieve, and together we win. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Vyas. In addition to your geography suggestion, which I really liked, I think someday Raj Bhagat must tell us how he fell in love with mapping per se. Maybe it was in his geography class. Dr. Roy, your wish list.
Thank you very much. I think many of my wish list has been covered, so I will be direct on what has not been covered. Urban sector and infrastructure development requires a measurement of the certain parameters. These measurements require a very high resolution maps, and also it needs a topographic correction. So at the moment, geospatial policy has addressed up to 1 meter resolution, but for detailed high granularity maps of urban sector and also in the infrastructure development, you need a scientifically and technically solid data, and that should be acquisition of such data should be enabled, and a private sector through a regular mechanism of ensure that there is a safety of the data and also security aspects. So that aspect, people are using coarse resolution data for studies on urban and infrastructure analysis, which is technically wrong.
Thank you, Dr. Roy, in bringing up the resolution. I am not going to give Madhav, Raj, and Beena time because as WRI, they have huge access to government. They will make their own case. And we are exactly at 4 o'clock. So Dr. Vijay Raghavan, any closing comments? And then we are good to say thank you to everybody, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I've been really, this has been a learning experience right from citizen matters to technologies and remote sensing. And I've learned a lot. All points are well taken. And we'll do everything to make data in a manner which is enabled for access and citizens' use. And please feel free to be in touch with me at any time. And, you know, all of government, all of our colleagues are there to make sure that the new geospatial rules, the guidelines, the drone policy are used for both economic and social well-being. And as I highlighted, in the context of climate change and sustainable development in the best possible way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to all the fellow panelists for hanging in here for all the 2 hours. To all our attendees who have also been with us for the last 2 hours, thank you so much and all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you.